This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Way back when I was in high school, you had these elective classes that you could take, primarily related to humanities. And for me, there was a class that really caught my attention. First off, the thing that was so glaring about it was the fact that the name was odd. I'd never heard of it before. The name of the class was called Thanatology. And it sounds like something you'd study at a graduate level at a university. But when I began to understand what that actually meant, that we would be studying the dead and all things associated with death, I was intrigued, to say the least. And it was in this class that I first, all those years ago, considered the word coroner. Today, we're going to have a discussion about the office of coroner. What does it mean? What's its origins? And what's the status even today? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Let me tell you how ignorant I am, Dave. We'll start off the conversation this way.
Wow.
When I first heard the word coroner or title coroner, I thought, because I knew enough to know that it had to do with death. The office had something to do with death, obviously, but I didn't understand the origin of the word. I thought that it probably had something to do with coronary, or like coronary artery or coronary vessels, in the, because, and look, it stands to reason, because the number one killer in America is coronary artery disease. The lion's share of people are not going to die from a gunshot wound or a stabbing or some kind of exotic disease. Most people are actually going to die of something related to their heart, generally heart disease. All right. And so kind of stands to reason. I don't know. Did you ever give the word consideration at all?
I did when Elvis Presley died. That was the first time I ever actually really thought about coroners, medical examiners, and doctors of death. Those who make decisions around a dead body and how they died. Because the question was, what killed Elvis? And at the time, by the way, I have to tell you that the doctor that announced how he died, what caused his death, was not approved for saying it. And actually what he said was not an untruth, because it's true for all of us. You die when your heart stops beating. And that is basically what they described in Elvis's death. And I thought, well, that's not a good answer. I need a better answer. Where's the coroner? Where's the medical examiner? Because back then, Quincy, the Jack Klugman television show about the ME, the medical examiner, was a hit television show. And I'm thinking, Elvis died because his heart stopped beating. Okay, great. Give me the juice. What else is there? And that was the first time I actually really thought about what a coroner / medical examiner. I say those together because I'm assuming that they're not the same thing.
No.
Can we start with that? What is the difference?
Yeah. First off, I got to go down a little rabbit hole here with you. One of the biggest regrets in my life, when I first got into the field, one of the organizations I joined was, and it still exists today, is the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners. I'm no longer a member, but it's a fascinating organization. They've been around for a long time. I think they're based in Pennsylvania, which, by the way, is a coroner state. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But Dave, one of my biggest regrets was that I think it was the year that I joined, they were having their national meeting, and I can't remember where it was, but guess who the headline speaker was?
Who?
Jack Klugman. The guy that played the guy, from.
Please tell me it was before he. Let's look this all the time. And the guy, I guess he had his voice box taken out or something. I don't know.
Well, I think he did. He was very raspy, but he played Quincy, and of course he had played Oscar in The Odd Couple, and and he was going to come and speak, and I was thinking, wow, compared to a lot of the kind of dry science that you have to listen to, wouldn't it have been cool?
Yeah,
to sit there and listen to Jack Klugman about the filming of Quincy and what that was like to be, kind of inserted into that world. Because listen, when I tell people what I did for a living, I get two responses. One is older and one is more modern. They will say to me, "Oh, just like Quincy," and that's the older generation,
right?
And which I'm like, well, yeah, I guess if that's your point of reference. The one that I take exception to, though, is they'll say, "Oh, yeah, just like Dexter," and I'm like, no. Dexter is, well, first off, he's a serial killer. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
and he dealt in bloodstain analysis, but they associate. It's weird, how time goes by and things get jumbled up. And boy, are we talking about time going by, because that's something that many people, I think, don't truly realize how ancient, and ancient is really a term that we can apply to this office, how ancient the coroner's office is, Dave. It goes back to essentially all the way back to 1194.
Medieval England. That's what you can say.
Yeah, medieval England. Yeah.
I didn't know this until Joe and I were talking. Just to give you an aside, we were talking about different shows and topics and things like that. And the show is Body Bags. And we deal with the death of individuals or groups and how they died, and getting into the science and the things that you have to learn as you go in many cases, and the things you have learned and how decisions are made when you announce to the world how somebody passed and what have you. There's a whole lot there. There's a lot of meat on that bone, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
No.
There's so much more in the world of crime reporting and things like that. The idea of how forensics play into these things is just beyond anything I can imagine, really. And so when I look back on this, knowing we were going to be talking, and by the way, having the passing of Cyril Wecht and Werner
Spitz,
having those two back to back, and we had been talking about doing this coroner show, I thought, man, this is a good piece of timing to figure out.
Yeah,
because I don't know. And when I saw the thing about medieval England and coroners, and you know what, friends, bottom line, it's been about money and power. The actual coroner is about money, because when somebody dies, the king got the spoils.
Yeah.
It's like, I looked at that and I went, you got to be kidding. The term murder is even based on basically what they called the tax that they would, give to people when they found a dead body. You realize back then, if you found a dead body, okay, you find somebody dead in the street, it's your job to go and round up a posse and figure out who killed him or what happened to him. And if you can't do it, they're going to fine you.
Yeah, and that comes from the article of Air, which actually came out in 1194. And the phraseology that they use is you were to send out the hue and cry.
Right, the hue and cry.
The hue and cry. And like so many other things, there's an attachment, or there's an association with taxation. And that's essentially what it came down to. When you think about what was going on at that particular time in Great Britain, you had the Norman conquest that had occurred, which, the Normans are French, is what it comes down to. And
can I stop you real quick? When I saw that being mentioned, Joe, I went back and reread parts of the, into the history a little bit. I'm going, Norman who? Who are you talking about? Norman. I mean,
Well, think Normandy, and so and Brittany, and those areas over in France. When the Normans took over, the Anglo-Saxons did not appreciate it too much, and so they had a habit of killing Normans. And so, murdrum, which the word murder comes from, was essentially there was a law that was established, to try to stop people from killing Normans.
Wow.
And, it's from this line, that we get this establishment of this very interesting office. And yeah, it is all rooted in money. And let me ask you this, Dave, have you ever heard the old adage that it is illegal to commit suicide? Have you ever heard that term?
I have.
Before?
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually rooted in ancient law in Great Britain. And here's why. Yeah. Here's why. Because in order to penalize somebody for something, all right, it has to be codified. It has to be written down. So to actually, from an administrative standpoint, it was going to be more painful for the citizenry if they committed suicide than actually being involved in a murder. You say, well, how do you punish somebody for suicide? Let me tell you how. If you committed suicide, and there's actually even more ancient linkage for this, but if you committed suicide, it was viewed, they would frame it in terms of the church. It's like an insult to God, all right? You're introducing your will into the will of God, all right? If it was a suicide, then everything that you possessed, guess who got it? The king. The king got it. And I can't prove this necessarily, but I think that that's where this idea, the genesis of this idea of a death tax actually comes from. Where it's the idea that you're punished even in death, relative to your financial responsibilities for taxation and all those sorts of things. So they took this very seriously, and it came at a particular confluence in history where this office actually kind of sprung into existence. And there's been any number of people over the years that have stated, well, the office actually existed even prior to this founding date, that there was something that they had structured in their mind. And all of this kind of ties back to the laws governing how Normans were going to be treated.
Wow.
And of course, I guess the chief Norman, if you put it this way, in the chief in the sense that this individual is kind of rooted in the history of the development of the office of the coroner, is actually a king that everyone will have heard of, that everyone will be familiar with. And he was a king of England. And guess what? This guy that was the king of England probably visited England less than 5 times during his entire reign. But yet he set in motion what would become modern medical legal death investigation.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I guess if you're in a profession, at some point in time, you want to try to understand the history, the origins of the profession that you've been involved in. I've always been quite fascinated by the history of the coroner system, and secondarily to that, the medical examiner system, because they kind of one evolved out of the other.
I didn't even know there was a difference, Joe. Okay, just so you know, outside of your world, coroner, medical examiner, I lump them all together. I mean, it's psychology, psychiatrist, that kind of thing. I don't know the difference, and yet there is a big difference. I was looking back at the coroner thing, and, when you were talking about, I'm not kidding, I'm looking at Norman Who, and on top of that, I'm thinking back in the day, if you found the body, you were responsible for everything that happened afterwards, and
And you can listen. There's actually a story that's out there about the local coroner who, I gotta tell you, first off, the word coroner is not actually the original term. The original term is actually crowner. And yes, you heard that right, crowner, because the individual is hearing the pleas of the crown. And that is
a traveling judge.
A traveling judge, yeah. And you realize how long it takes to travel? First off, you have to be notified that someone is dead. You're on horseback in medieval England, and you're having to travel to go and verify this. So when you think about these people that would, say, for instance, find a dead body, you're going to be standing by with a decomposing body. And there's one story that
and they weren't allowed to move them either, were they?
They weren't.
If you died in the ground, you died right here in front of my house.
Right.
You had a heart attack or whatever, but no matter what, you're dead. And we know now, again, there's no cell phones. There's no technology out there to notify anybody. So no matter where this guy is, he has to get the message. First of all, there's a dead body in my yard. Second of all, he has to make plans for the trip to come to my place and then do that. So you're talking days,
if not weeks, because the message has to be sent out to these appointees. And these appointees, here's the interesting thing, they're appointed by the crown.
Right.
And there's a specific reason for that. And, you have to kind of understand the history of this and, where does it originate from?
The history of the crown. You sent me a picture, Joe, of you and Noah.
Yeah.
What is that picture?
Yeah, well, the nerd in me, I couldn't resist.
Okay.
I've talked about it before. Please indulge me. We've been to England several times.
Right.
Going back in September. We're going back to speak at CrimCon in UK in September, and I'm looking forward to that certainly. But
CrimCon is spreading like
it
pop
is.
idol.
It's something, isn't it? So I'm looking forward to going over there. But yeah, in one of our trips over, I had my bride take a picture of Noah. Noah's he may have been 13, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it didn't look like a recent picture. I mean,
no, it's not a recent picture.
Graduated college, been in the military, and
yeah, my hair's a little bit less gray. But anyway, we're standing outside of Parliament there in Westminster, and behind us is the famous statue of Richard the Lionhearted. It's King Richard I, and he's he's like one of the original Norman kings,
Wow.
And he's really kind of the uniter. I think that they try to make him out to be this grand hero. The statue itself has got a fascinating history. I think that the statue was erected in like 1860, and right after they erected the thing, the tail fell off. And after they got that reattached, World War II came along, and it had during the Blitzkrieg, it got missed by a matter of yards by a bomb that was dropped in the yard of the old palace. They call it the Old Palace Yard. That's where the statue stands. And it's him on the back of a horse. He's got his sword raised in the air, this sort of thing. And he was known as a Crusader king, and he liked to make war. But guess what war requires, Dave? It requires money. And so one of the problems is that there's always been a linkage between coroners and sheriffs, even to this day. Did you know that in certain states, in certain locations, the coroner is the only person in that particular state that has the authority to arrest the sheriff?
A quick aside. This happened in Jasper, Alabama, where the sheriff was called by a scammer. We have a warrant for your arrest, and if you don't pay us a certain amount of money, we're going to show up and take you into custody. And he said, well, go ahead and bring the coroner with you, because that's the only person that can arrest me.
Yep. And that is the truth. And because both of these positions are elected, if the sheriff is supplanted or arrested, the chief deputy sheriff does not become the sheriff. It's the coroner for a temporary period of time that becomes the sheriff. Yeah, de facto. So it's got an interesting history.
That happens now?
Yeah, it can. It's dependent upon state law, and that's the craziness of all of this, is because these you've got two systems in the United States. You've got the coroner system and the medical examiner system. And still, there's mid-20s, I guess, number of states that still have coroners. And they're in various different structures. And so the coroner is a very powerful position and ancient. As a matter of fact, Dave, the word coroner, bailiff, and sheriff are probably the only words that we could recognize if we were reading the Magna Carta. It's like in the 27th chapter, and those names all appear. That's how old this is. That's how ancient the office is. So with King Richard, his goal was to take Jerusalem, okay? But he was kidnapped a couple of times and held for ransom. And we've all heard about Robin Hood and, evil right. King John. Well, King John was his brother, and he became, the king in the absence of King Richard I. Well, the sheriffs, who were originally formed not so much for law enforcement, but for taxation, and they still collect taxes to this day, that office does, the money wasn't making it back to the crown. It would go to all of the lords. So they had to figure out a way to engineer this thing. And of course, it's always going to go down to the lowest man on the totem pole, who's the average everyday citizen. They're going to tax you for something. And if the crown needs some money, they're going to come and they're going to tax you for dying. And forfeiting property if you commit suicide and all these other weird things like this. And so those monies would be sent directly to the king to further finance these exploits that he was on.
It went back to the coroner thing of where, you find a body in your yard, you're responsible for it. And I was reading along and it was like they actually got to the point where it was so bad on the commoners, that they actually would take the body and drag it to a different town. Just you get it out of the yard because I don't want this. I can't afford to have this dead body in my yard and pay for everything.
Yeah, I know. And it would fall squarely on their shoulders.
That's
on the
insane.
Citizen shoulder. Yeah, or the not citizens, subjects' shoulders.
Right. And kind of makes you understand why our founding fathers had such
disdain,
a broad understanding of how bad it could be and what they wanted. That's what people don't understand is that this system that you showed me about the coroner system, where it began and how it operated. That's what our forefathers wanted to get away from so that the little guy had a chance, that the little guy didn't foot the bill for the rich and powerful, that the little guy could become something better than what they had been born into, because this actually defined it. When I'm thinking of myself, somebody dies in my yard, I have to pay for everything.
Right.
Kids, load up the wagon. We're dragging this guy over, Could be.
Yeah. It's an interesting, when you think about going back over, I don't know, 1,000 years, as ancient as this office is, they had no other system. There was not a system that was in existence prior to this. So they've kind of created this thing. And what do you do with it? Well, people are going to die. They're going to die in unexplained ways. And it's from this position of the origin of the office of coroner, which began to kind of evolve out of that medieval context. It's going to evolve with English common law. And fascinatingly enough, when America was colonized, Dave, they had no other system. So they brought the coroner system with them. And some of the first inquiries that were ever held were in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And, there are early examples of actual coroner's juries being impaneled, which is a completely different thing than we might be used to in the world, even though the coroner still has the ability to call and seat a coroner's jury to determine what the manner and cause of death are. They can impanel this group of people. Another very interesting aside that has to do with Bonnie and Clyde and the coroner system is that many, many years ago, this thing's all over the web now, but I actually had an original photostatic copy of the reports on Bonnie and Clyde's bodies. I was working as a coroner investigator in Louisiana, and I was at state coroner's meeting, and I met the coroner at that time, or one of their assistants. I can't remember which one. they had the original copy of the coroner's jury that had been impaneled in order to make the determination about Bonnie and Clyde, and said, "Would you like a copy of it?" I was like, "Are you kidding me? Of course I would. I've still got that copy. They mailed it to me, and it's folded up in my desk somewhere at work." And it's fascinating. It's actually written out in longhand, and there were 12 men that sat on this jury, on this coroner's jury, to determine the manner and cause of Bonnie and Clyde's death, or to bear witness to it. And they
lead poisoning from the number of bullets.
Exactly. And they go into great descriptors for back then of the clothing that Bonnie and Clyde were both wearing. They talked about the circumstances, how this was, kind of set up, and that the law enforcement, Frank Hamer, laid in wait with his posse, and they lit them up. But it goes into great detail talking about the clothing, the gunshot wounds, all this sorts of things. And they didn't necessarily do what we would consider to be a modern forensic autopsy, but they knew, because this was so significant, that they had to document it. And that's what it comes down to when we begin to think about the documentation of death. Leaving a mark behind that someone has actually existed and indwelled in this world, and what exactly brought about their deaths. But here's the problem. Even though we now exist in these times, which we're surrounded by all of this technology, marvelous technology that we didn't even have access to when I started my career many years ago, now we live in a world that where we're making decisions at a molecular level about things and about crime science and forensic science. Still to this day, this ancient office is still trying to figure out where its place is in this world.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, you ever heard the old term, the sun never set on the British Empire? Have you ever heard that term before?
I have.
Yeah. So take that idea, all right, and what that means is that wherever the British had a colony of some kind, they would introduce the law of the land would be British common law, okay? Right. And along with that came the office of coroner. So when you begin to think about this office, this ancient office, you can still go to Australia, you can go to New Zealand, go to Canada, here in the U.S., and a lot of their former protectorates around the world, you're still going to find at least a semblance of the coroner system. Wow. That is still in place. And it comes in a variety of different forms. Coroners for the longest have been, certainly in Great Britain, I think even, they're like solicitors. They're essentially attorneys that are in positions of authority. And we even see that, like, for instance, the county in Nebraska, for instance, the county attorney is the coroner or acts as a coroner there. And it varies from state to state. And so about, I don't know, I guess probably about a third of the United States still has the office of coroner where it's solely the coroner. In my jurisdiction, in Louisiana, it's completely a coroner state there.
Right.
Okay. And what that means is, in order to be the coroner for a particular parish, you have to be a physician to run for the office. Okay. You with me? So at least you have a baseline understanding of basic human anatomy and pathology and all that sort of thing. Here in Alabama, the only educational requirement is a high school diploma or equivalency to run for the same office.
Scared me to death when I found out a friend of mine was running for coroner, and I asked him, I said, why? You sell carpet. What does that mean? How can you possibly be a coroner without having a medical background?
Yeah, I know. And a lot of people are amazed by that. And listen, there are fine coroners out there that don't have a dozen letters after their name. Right. People are committed to doing a good job. They see that there is a need for somebody to take care of the dead, and by extension, take care of families that are associated with the dead and trying to help them through the process. But that's the big rub. The first time we actually hear the term medical examiner in the U.S. is, I think it goes back to, I think it's in Massachusetts back in the 1870s. They realized at that point in time, and again, Massachusetts, one of the original colonies, right. Massachusetts Bay Colony, all these sorts of things. They understood that they needed medical consultation. And so there was kind of a position that was established where the individual would consult with the coroner and give advice to the coroner, because these are, these matters involving death are highly complex. You're not going to understand form and function if you're an elected individual. You're not going to understand basic pathology, anatomy, all these sorts of things. And that's when you first get this idea that modern medicine was dipping its toe into the water of government administration relative to how are the dead going to be administrated and their families and all these sorts of things.
Something you sent to me, Joe.
Yeah.
So the first election that they actually had for a position of coroner happened in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1636.
Yeah.
And there's this paragraph that came from the piece that you sent me that it says, in all states, the coroner was charged with convening an inquest when notified that someone in their jurisdiction, originally within walking distance, had come to his death by violence or suffered an untimely death. Such inquests, wherever practical, were to take place where the body lies and were to be attended by a specific number of, quote, good and lawful men. And that number was different from state to state. 8 in Massachusetts, but 14 in South Carolina. And they were to be under oath upon a view of the body there lying dead, how, in what manner, and by whom he or she came to his or her death. This is very specific and very orderly of what is expected to be determined when there is a dead body that did not die naturally.
Yes.
This goes back to the basis of our nation. We started with this in place.
Right.
And now we have what you've explained to the different. There's a difference between a coroner and now medical examiner.
Yeah, there is. And you'll have this fusion of many states that you'll go to will have both an elected coroner at the county level, and then there will be a state, quote unquote, state medical examiner who many times, which I'm not in agreement with the way this works, will be governed or administrated by the state, the overarching state law enforcement mechanism. Okay. So you can have a state medical examiner, but they work under the structure of law enforcement. Not a fan of that. I like the idea of an independent group of people that can make a determination without being influenced by any outside factors, including law enforcement or prosecutors. That's the idea. You want people that are going to be objective, that are going to be, more importantly, scientifically objective. They're not going to allow policy and politics and all sorts of things to influence what they're seeing before them. All right. And so, and they're not necessarily going to have a dog in the fight when it comes to thinking about how things are prosecuted. I'll give you an interesting kind of situation here, and this has always fascinated me. In California, for instance, it's not this way all over the state, but this goes to show you how hit and miss it is. They have the office of coroner sheriff. So the sheriff actually has a division within that office that works as the coroner. Okay. You can go to other locations where you'll have a standalone coroner that they have no contact with law enforcement. They are a standalone, like I'd mentioned in Louisiana, for instance, where it is parish to parish. You have to be a physician. And I think the way it used to go was, it might still go this way. The coroner there would be a physician. If a physician was not available, a dentist could run. If a dentist was not available, a veterinarian could run. And so that was kind of how that whole, but they had the idea that at least you had to have some kind of basic understanding of how this all operated. And if you like that one, let me give you one more. Again, I'm focusing a little bit heavily in this episode about Louisiana, but it's where I learned. It's where I started out. I started out in a coroner system and wound up in a medical examiner system. In Louisiana, the coroner is a person that was responsible for committals. Let that sink in. So in addition to being a death investigator, I would have to go out and write what we refer to as orders of protective custody.
Wow.
And it's one of the most bizarre things. Essentially all the loved one would have to say is they are a danger to themselves and others. We would write out an OPC, hand it over to the local constabulary, whether it's the sheriff or the municipality, and they go out and they take this person into custody and take them to a mental hospital and keep them in there for 24 hours. There was another one for 72. Wow. And then there's deputy coroners who are psychiatrists that would go out and do the examinations. So you've got this wide variety of kind of how this office is morphed. And the thing about sheriff's offices, even though they existed at the same time the coroner existed, they've pretty much stayed the same. You know, what their responsibilities are, you know, from state to state. Coroner, you first off, if your state has a coroner, it's their duties might vary widely from one state to the next. It's such an odd arrangement, and no wonder there's a lot of confusion out there about the way the systems are set up and how they're administrated and what qualifies you to be a coroner. Here's one of the problems that arises, though. The days of people sitting at home and just taking things on face value scientifically to say, well, we've got an elected official who has been deemed worthy to sit in this office. It's going to make a determination about manner and cause of death. Those days are gone because public has awakened to the level of where we are technologically. They have an expectation that what they see on television is going to translate into those individuals that are holding office, that are, let's face it, making decisions about the most horrific thing that's ever going to befall a family. We're talking about a death.
Right.
So what's your level of understanding, as to what's going on? And I think that's a place where we are, Dave, in the country right now.
I think the fact that when you and I are talking about a death or an investigation, and having been around a lot of this for a long time, I still am shocked at how little I know with what's going on in the investigation and how much I depend on you to fill in the blanks on what happened. It's not as clear cut as it appears. This person might have been shot, but they also might have been stabbed. Think about this. With the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 61 years later, we're still arguing.
Yeah.
And that's why I look at this and I just thought, silly, that coroner, medical examiner were the exact same thing. I thought they were independent of police because I cannot imagine how it can possibly be good that those two entities should work one and the same. They have to be separate.
Yeah, they have to be separate. You have to be collegial. You have to be able to get along, and you do. But you don't want influence exerted. And here's another thing. You were mentioning JFK. Earl Rose, who we talked about extensively, that was there at Parkland. He was a newly minted medical examiner. This was a new construct in Dallas. At that time in Texas. Because do you know who the de facto coroner is in Texas? They don't use the term coroner. The justice of the peace.
Oh, good grief. In
a county in Texas is actually the de facto coroner. So you have that little dynamic going on. And it's so variable from state to state. And many states have done away with the office of coroner. And you really wonder, how has that been backfilled since that time? Are those offices, are they sufficient to the task? You think about like Florida, for instance, they don't have coroners. They used to have coroners years ago. They have district medical examiners, and they literally have the state broken into districts. And you have a forensic pathologist that administrates that particular district. And it's an efficient system. And the people there are highly trained to go out and do the job of being a death investigator, a medical legal death investigator, a medical legal office that's going to bring in accurate information. Now, there are fine offices out there that are strictly coroner's offices that do a bang-up job. I think about Nevada, for instance. They don't have medical examiners in Nevada. City of Las Vegas has a coroner. Clark County has a coroner, and they do a fine job. As a matter of fact, if you watch television at all, I think one of those CIS shows was based there in Vegas, and the coroner plays a prominent role in that. The problem is this: if you do away with the office of coroner, what are you going to replace it with? What are you prepared to, and I'm saying you in the universal sense, what are you going to replace it with? Do you have the mechanism in place to go back and hire someone, because medical examiners are actually appointed? It's not an elected position, and they're physicians. And in the ideal situation, you want a board certified forensic pathologist to be the chief medical examiner for that area. Well, where are you going to find one of those? Because it's out of all of the specialties in medicine, it's one of the least populated. It's forensic pathology is an example of those things. It's like the more education you get, the less money you make. And it's like, because you're going to go through, and let's look at it. Let's look at it this way. If you're going to become a forensic pathologist, this is what you have to do. You got to get an undergraduate degree, pre-med, chemistry, biochem, whatever it is. Then you're going to go to medical school for 4 years. All right. So you're 8 years in higher ed at this point in time. After you finish medical school, then you're going to have to do a pathology residency, which involves everything from how to run a medical laboratory to how to do anatomical dissections, looking for specific disease pathology. Dave, that course of training, the pathology residency alone, is 5 years.
Wow.
And then if you want to be a forensic pathologist, you got to find a fellowship that's an additional year. So after you've gone through, I don't know, however many years of training, then you're going to become a government employee. And let that sink in just for a second. You've gone through all of this training, and there's not a lot of people. And then you always have to look at it this way. If you have the training, are these people sufficient to the task? Are they really good at what they do? Because as you know, and I know from just having lived life, we know that everybody that enters into a field is not necessarily good at what they do. And there's no guarantees with it. And so the smaller the pool is what I'm saying. You have to find somebody that's not only a good forensic pathologist. Here's the rub. You got to find somebody that's a good administrator, because you're dealing with people that are having to view and deal with things that most of us can't even begin to imagine. So when people rush to say, well, we need to do away with the coroner system, we need to turn this thing around and bring us all into modern times. Okay, that's fine. Come up with a plan. Tell us, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in order to replace that person? Because they have to be replaced. Somebody has to make the determinations about manner and cause of death, those things that we always talk about on body bags, and to go in and fill that position so that it is going to serve the people of a particular jurisdiction at the worst possible time of their life, to give them the answers that they deserve. And, it's hard to go in and create a brand new mechanism where one has not existed before. I think Richard I understood that to a certain degree, because the office was essentially conjured and brought into existence. And it's been in existence for well over 1,000 years now. Who's going to undertake the job of replacing the office? I don't see it happening anytime soon. The one thing that I can say, one thing I do know, is that we have to have people that are out there that are technically proficient and that are compassionate. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to that family member that you're either going to be standing in their doorway, seated across a desk from, and you're going to have to give them the most horrible news that they've ever received, that their loved one has passed on. Do you have the skills sufficient to the task to be a coroner? That's the question that has to be asked. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
Aldous Hodge returns as Alex Cross, your favorite detective on television, for Season 2 of the hit show Cross, premiering February 11th exclusively on Prime Video. Critics called Season 1 one of the year's best shows, with over 40 million viewers worldwide. And on February 11th, the story continues with a new season. From creator Ben Watkins and based upon characters created by James Patterson, Cross is Washington, D.C.'s most brilliant homicide detective and forensic psychologist. Fresh off his capture of the infamous serial killer The Fanboy, Cross teams up with the FBI to hunt down a vigilante serial killer targeting corrupt billionaires. As the case unfolds, Cross navigates a moral crossroads where the lines between justice and vengeance are blurred. Cross is back and better than ever. This season, get ready for a new case, higher stakes, but the same Cross. Watch Season 2 of Cross. New episodes weekly starting February 11th, only on Prime Video.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.